is just it's the imagination of something going wrong in the future, right? And
Exactly.
that's very much linked to ignorance, not knowing. And like you said, the closer you are to something, the more you learn about it, the more fear drops.
I found an environment where I can utilize these areas and create value for other people and create value for myself. Although tourism can be very effective in breaking down negative stereotypes, connecting people, and bringing income into the communities, it was not a good mechanism for creating long-term sustainable change. I look at my organization today, it's like, I'm not building, this isn't me creating an organization for myself, it's me setting up the infrastructure and the governance and the processes and the systems so that 100 years from now, things can be a little bit different.
What's it like to live for 12 years in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro? What's it like to build a social enterprise that goes on to help thousands of people across 100 different favelas? Today I was joined by Adam Newman, the founder of Favela Inc., who's gone on to create a massive impact across Rio de Janeiro. You're going to absolutely love this episode. I found it incredibly inspiring. For anyone who's interested in making a global impact or really getting into communities and helping them with some of the systemic issues they may face, especially in developing countries, this episode is going to be incredible. So don't forget to tune in. So today I'm joined by a very special guest, Adam Newman. Adam, welcome to the Warrior Academy podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'd love to get straight into it and just, talk about where it all started, growing up in the States. If you could take us back, let me know, how did it go? Childhood in the States.
Yeah, so I grew up in the countryside of Colorado, up in the mountains, 9,000 feet elevation, cold, far from the city, and grew up with very integrated with nature, horseback riding, bicycle riding, skiing. Everything was very much based about the connection with nature. Single child, so I have a half brother, but I grew up majority of my life by myself. So I spent the majority of my time in nature, and that's where I found connection and solitude. And eventually ended up going to school in the city about 45 minutes away. And so living that kind of dynamic of being from one place and living in another place, and discovering all the challenges in between the two of them.
Amazing. Really interesting. So, I mean, one of the things we spoke about before we started doing this podcast was your passion for traveling. When did that start? Because it started quite young, right?
Yeah, I mean, since I was a kid, my parents always put a lot of emphasis on experiences. So, as a middle class family, a lot of my friends might have had nice cars and nice televisions, but we were going on trips to Mexico or road trips across the United States.
So adventure was kind of at the heart of your family.
Adventure and experience. It was always about life experience, human connection, and cherishing the moments that we share together rather than the things. And I think from that process, when I was 16 years old, my parents sent me to Mexico to live with a Mexican family and studied Spanish, every single day. And that was a very confronting experience because it was like going into a totally different reality where I don't speak the language, don't know anything about the culture. And all, yeah, so you go through this whole self-identity process of kind of rediscovering who you are in that context and then having to build on additional sides to you in order to exist and be able to achieve success within that new context.
Yeah. It's amazing how much traveling can really alter your mindset around things, right? And even alter the way in which you look at your own life, the pace at which you're living in, or the things that you fill your time up with. And I know certainly for me, traveling around the world from a very young age, I've really put travel and adventure and experience at the very top of my priorities, and it's really enriched my life doing that. And I've learned a lot and developed a lot from doing that. Can you think back of a childhood memory that was your most extreme kind of culture shock? Would it be that living in Mexico for the first time? That was the biggest shock, right?
I would say that would probably be one of the biggest shocks. I mean, I was a really shy kid, so like speaking in public, speaking in class, I was always the small kid. So it was like, all the other kids are growing and they're strong. And I was like, I always felt like kind of like the outcast in that sense, right? So it was always trying to maybe feel like I had to prove something within those contexts. Suffered a lot of bullying and things like that in school. But when I went to Mexico, I was put in this spotlight where it was like, Okay, initially I was like, all I wanted to do was sit in my room every single day and hide from this world of that I didn't know. But I played football, soccer my whole life, and so that was my tool for communication, where I could find some kind of solace in that. Like, okay, we speak the same language. So that's what kind of got me out of the house. And then as I started playing soccer with the local kids, and showing them I had some level of ability there. Then we started creating the human connection. I started to feel like, okay, actually, this is possible. And then each day it was over and over again. It's like building a little bit of confidence, using more Spanish words, ordering a piece of pizza and actually getting what you ordered. So that you start building confidence over time. And I think that was a very fundamentally transformative process for me.
That's really interesting. And do you know what's really interesting is a lot of the guests that I interview have been through bullying to some degree when they're younger. I read a book about on-bullying called Not a Victim, and it dives into lots of case studies where people who have gone through bullying, typically quite severe bullying, actually attest the success that they experience later in life to the bullying they've been through. And it kind of sounds strange and counterintuitive, right? No one wants their kids to go through bullying, but actually bullying could be one of those things that actually make or break a child's character. And when you look back at your own bullying, this is the first time I've heard you mention bullying.
Yeah.
Was it quite severe? Did it influence your life in a positive way?
Well, absolutely, it influenced in a positive way. I think severity is a very individual experience. So it's like somebody can go through very severe bullying in one context, but if you're talking about like white middle class America, like severe bullying can take on a different level of context. So like severe bullying for the Mexicans or for the Afro American community within the school is like literal physical violence against each other, right? For me, growing up in the countryside of Colorado, just having people even criticize or verbally say things to me that were negative towards my image, then that was a severe experience for me in terms of bullying. But I was never like physically attacked or anything like that. But it was always kind of being outcasted. Is like you're the kid from the countryside, right? And then within school, I was in a private program within the public school system. So we had this dynamic of you have the reg ed, the regular education kids, and the like advanced education kids. So that already like started creating this sense of separation. Okay. And then it's like you're the nerd. You're short. You come from outside the city. Like all these different things. You carry a big backpack with a lot of books in it because I got to go 45 minutes from home each day. So all those things start. So there's a lot of verbal abuse in a sense that just and that just made me want to go inside. Right? So I think there's like two different ways that people react to bullying, and one is either through external like aggression, like fighting back, and the other is like through internal retreat and like hiding within yourself. That was my methodology for dealing with the bullying sense.
You kind of went into a form of like a protective layer you created around yourself and avoided this.
Yeah, avoiding speaking, avoiding putting yourself in a vulnerable situation. Exactly. Yeah. But when I finished high school and moved on to college, and I decided to go to Arizona State University, which is outside of Colorado, so it was like a new environment. And this is part of the reason I want to go somewhere new, because it's like I can rebuild. I can be whoever I want in this place.
Right. You can reinvent yourself.
Yeah. Nobody knows who I am.
One of the things that you and I have spoken about before is identity, and identity is massive, especially when you're working through the philanthropy and social enterprise and with charity work. A lot of the young people that you work with and that I work with, they have this identity which they then cling on to, which actually does them damage long term. It's interesting then, bullying is a huge part of that, right? Because when you associated your identity to being a bullied child, a victim in that sense, you couldn't then experience life properly. But then when you went to a new place, that was almost, it sounds like your opportunity to kind of redefine your identity, become who you wanted to be, because the people around you weren't kind of cementing that identity, saying this is who you are.
Exactly. Yeah.
It felt like what a freeing experience.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, when I first stepped into the university, like I was carrying this baggage of this past identity of who I thought I was or how I had to be. And then, I was at the largest school in the United States. So we're talking about 70,000 students in this place.
70,000?
70,000. Yeah. So there's there's within
Where I grew up, there weren't even that many. Like the nearest 10 towns near me, I think.
yeah, well, within that kind of quantity, there's a power in the sense of the loss of the individual. So now it's like you're part of such a massive collective. There's not so much attention on you.
So you can,
for in a school of 50 kids, it's like,
easily.
yeah, exactly.
The downside is obviously that identity.
Yeah, and you have to fight harder to stick out. I mean, you have to have more specific types of attributes and skills and things in order to be able to gain any kind of space or influence.
Yeah.
You know, so it was within that first year of school where I think I was starting to transition into the new version of myself. It was like kind of like could call it even like a rebirth process in a way. And ultimately the rebirth of my identity actually came through a psilocybin experience, where I started seeing myself externally from distance, where I was like, oh, this isn't who I have to be. This is who I've told myself I am over time, but I can be whoever I want to be. So what would it look like if I reconstructed that identity? And I even did like, funny things like the first day of class where it's like, tell something interesting about yourself. I was like, well, I'm just going to make something up. Really? It's like, so I've been, I climbed to the top of Everest, and then everyone, oh, wow, oh my God. And then after class, everyone's coming up, wow, you climbed Everest? And so it was like, just.
Would you then say, oh, I was just joking?
Yeah, I was just kidding. But
really?
But it was like an exercise.
Testing the boundary a little bit.
Yeah, what would happen if I just started telling a different story?
Yeah.
How would people respond to that? And so I started to see that you are the author of your own story. You can build the narrative you want for yourself, and you can do it whenever you want. There's no like, oh, you've been this, and now if you want to transition into something else, there's a process. You can literally tomorrow say, no, I used to be this, and now I'm that. And people spend a lifetime, right, suffering their past identity, and it can literally just be a snap, and you can shift your mindset completely.
We've only met today.
Yeah.
There are so many things you've just said regarding shape your identity, kind of main character energy and just like defining who you are and how flexible that can actually be, that I feel tie into what it is you do today and the work you're doing. It's like a no-brainer for me to see why you do what you do, where that energy's come from, especially when it comes to the young people and the people within the favelas that you work with.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, as we progress through your life quite quickly, I often find when I get interviewed, I'm like, I swear I missed out like 10 years. and I've got some great stories of those years as well. We're just going to skip past.
Yeah, we need 3 hours just to get started, right?
We'll have to do a part 2. But there was a point where you went traveling and you then experienced what you called reverse culture shock.
Right.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So my junior year of university, I think something that's consistently happened over my life is I like to create experiences for myself that put me out of my comfort zone. So it's like whenever I start to fall into, and in my junior year of college, I did this without it being intentional. It just like, oh, here we go again. Let's do another uncomfortable experience. Before that, it was becoming the president of the Jewish fraternity. So it was like totally uncomfortable experience. The kid who doesn't know leadership skills, who doesn't talk in public. Now you got to manage 120, kids in school. But then after that, it was, let's go study abroad. Let's go to live in a new country for a long period of time and studying in a different language. Let's confront that experience, So it started with that. Now today it's perpetual. 2 weeks ago, I didn't even know I was going to be here in Dubai necessarily.
Just a quick shout out to the guys at Shield who manage this podcast, come up with the strategy behind the podcast, help me schedule interviews as well as do all of the editing and the producing of the podcast. Without them, we wouldn't be able to produce this podcast. If you would like to create your own podcast, I can't recommend the Shield team enough. They have done well over 100 episodes for me over the last few years, and I've been so pleased with the results. So have a look in the description of this video or the podcast episode, and you'll see how to get in touch with them yourself.
Even just a couple weeks ago, I had no idea that I was even going to be coming here. I was falling into the cycles of other people's scarcity. I live in the favela. So I'm in the middle of the context of where I'm trying to help people experiencing their challenges every day. And it can become a process where I start to take on their identity.
Right.
As soon as I start noticing that, then I interrupt that process by removing myself from that ecosystem to find inspiration and connect with, new people and new places. So my junior year of college, this is exactly what I did. And I decided to study abroad in Argentina and Peru in a called a multi-country program. and where I was studying Latin American economics and global marketing in Spanish. So in order to
in Spanish.
so in order to participate in the program, you had to have achieved.
That's a lot more complicated than just learning to ask for a pizza, right? In Spanish. So.
Yeah, it was very, very,
So your
very
whole course there was in Spanish.
all the classes, everything, was 100% in Spanish. So in our entire existence, the daily basis was
How many
thinking, learning, speaking Spanish.
Do you speak now?
I speak three languages, Portuguese. Yeah,
Amazing.
I can read Hebrew,
Okay.
but I can't speak it.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's one step too far.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So you were studying then, and then you're studying in Argentina and Peru, was it?
Yeah.
And then you went to Brazil.
Yeah. Well, no, actually, I didn't go to Brazil during that trip. Brazil was too expensive.
Okay.
And, I was on the total student backpacker budget. So after I finished the 6-month program in Lima, Peru, instead of buying a round trip ticket or a one-way ticket out of Lima, I bought a round trip ticket to Buenos Aires, which was cheaper. And then I backpacked through Bolivia and Chile back to Argentina. So through that experience, I fell in love with Latin America. I fell in love with the Latin culture. I really appreciated how much energy and importance people put on family, on community. And many times, kind of going back to the bullying leads to resilience, right? Sometimes the lack of material goods, the lack of access to riches also forces people to put high amounts of value into basic, more simple, guaranteed things like family, like community, like their next door neighbor. And so I really felt connected with that. And then when I went back to the United States at the end of the program, it was like confronting the complete total opposite of that.
Right. Yeah.
Where I was back in the university, in the Jewish fraternity, where the only thing that mattered was like, how well ironed is your suit, and what is the corporate job you're going to get, and what's the base salary, and how long will it take for you to work up the corporate ladder so that one day you can be, a millionaire.
That all felt kind of superficial, right? Totally. Going from where you were, where it was all about connection and meaning and experiences and community, to a place where it was fairly superficial from the outside looking in.
Yeah. Oh, it was totally confronting because all the decisions I had made up until studying abroad were based on those same principles, which is just kind of the common way that world economies and education systems are built, which is you go to school, you get an education. What are you going to study? Well, figure it out. You're 18 years old. Decide now who you're going to be in life, right? Even though you have no idea who you are. And then dedicate 4 years of your life to that area, get a job, work your way up the corporate ladder, and, get a house that's financed, get a car that's financed, keep a nice green lawn, and now you're living the American dream. Raise a family, repeat the process. The whole educational process is built around facilitating that cycle. And when I stepped out of that into South America and then came back into it, I saw it for what it is. Yeah. And I said, I don't want to participate in that cycle.
So that moment of kind of sudden realization that you don't want to be a part of this machine that you see, the kind of the treadmill up to the American dream, if you like.
Yeah.
You were like, right, I'm going to make a change. And you made quite a sudden change, it sounds like, right? Because you moved countries.
Yeah.
Almost immediately.
Yeah, I left the United States within 3 months after graduating from university.
One-way flight.
Yeah, one-way flight.
Now you're living in Brazil.
Yeah.
And where in Brazil did you move?
Yeah, I moved to Rio de Janeiro. Originally, I actually had no idea where I was going to go because I hadn't been to Brazil. I didn't speak Portuguese. I was just coming out of school, with huge amounts of student debt. So I didn't have the luxury of like, oh, let's just go and try it out and see what it's like, or I'll book an apartment. It was like, I showed up already in scarcity. I showed up already having to apply my entrepreneurial mentality to try to figure things out. I showed up having to apply my experiences from living in Mexico and from studying abroad to rapid cultural integration and language acquisition. Because if I didn't do those things, it was back to the US very quick. That's part of the reason I bought a one-way ticket, was I wanted to make it so that success was a requirement. There is no going back.
So I kind of burned the boats.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Exactly. I'm out of here.
That's it.
And there's no coming back.
No plan.
And don't tell the Brazilian authorities, because you're supposed to have a round trip ticket to even get the visa.
Well, you know what? They're actually here today. So
yeah. So yeah. Well, I'm sorry. What was your?
Yeah. So going back to that experience, that you're now living in Brazil,
right?
And I know what you do now. Everyone watching this at home doesn't really know what you're doing in Brazil right now. But this is where we get to what I find completely inspiring, which is the philanthropy and the social enterprise and the charity work you do within the favelas of Brazil. So how do we get there from you moving there to then living in the favelas for 12 years and changing so many lives?
Yeah. Well, originally I had no idea what I was going to be doing in Brazil, how I was going to do it, where I was going to be doing it. It was all unknowns. The only thing I knew was that I didn't want to live in the United States. I wanted to live a life of purpose. I wanted to be able to enjoy every single day of my job. So how could I find the crossroad between the things that I love to do in life and my unique gifts and the needs of other people? If I could find that crossroads, then I wouldn't want to take a day off for the rest of my life. And I believed that was possible. Even though everybody says that it's not possible, it's like, no, you have to do something that you don't like to do in order to make money so that eventually you can buy something that you may or may not need. Like that was the status quo. I truly believe that I could find that niche. And so I didn't know what it was. And when I arrived in Rio, I thought, okay, what are the things that I love the most? I love to travel. I love connecting with other people. So how can I leverage travel and connecting with people to live a life of purpose? This was the question that I didn't have the immediate answer to. And when I first got to Rio, I was also a little bit nervous because, before coming to Brazil, in the United States, we're always saying like Rio de Janeiro, the most dangerous city in the world. When you go to Brazil, like be careful. In Rio, it's like, globally renowned as a violent, dangerous city. And so when I got to Rio, I was carrying that as well. And the Brazilians in Rio were saying, oh, Rio's not that dangerous. There's just one rule that everybody knows. Don't go to the favela. As long as you don't go to the favela, everything's fine. But when you're coming from the airport towards the South Zone, the rich area of the city, all you see on both sides of the highway are favelas. Right. They even put up giant barriers to try to pretend like they're not there.
Really?
But you can see them. And so it's like, okay, this is a safe city, but I can't go to what's surrounding the entire. It didn't seem like it made sense. Favelas, right? That's what it felt like. Yeah. And so, I mean, today I know that 1 in 3 people live in a favela. Right. Roughly 3 million people in 1,000 favelas just in Rio de Janeiro.
Wow.
So how can you say that Rio's a safe city and then at the same time say that the favelas aren't? So based on my traditional philosophy of radical rebellion against what everybody says is what you're supposed to do, I decided to go into the favela by myself because none of the Brazilians I had met so far were willing to go there with me.
So that disruptive nature of you was kind of carried you into the favelas.
Yeah, I was like, just to find out for myself.
A point on disruptive. We that word disruptive. We have a lot of students, and the parents or the teachers really kind of penalize disruptive behavior. And I've got a kind of different approach with it. I think that it's funny how when we're younger, bad behavior is seen as disruptive. When we're older, we're kind of seeking adults to be
innovative,
to be as like innovation, right? Disruption isn't bad anymore. It's now good. And I wonder if there's a way we can foster that in young people to understand the difference. It's difficult. It's a gray area, as most things.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it just comes down to providing structured, unstructured environments. So it's like the natural methodology is that there is no preset methodology. That things can go in different ways in different directions. And that's very challenging for a traditional mentality on education, which is everything's linear, right? Like you learn this and then you learn that and you learn this. Disruption or innovation is like, it's going like this and nope, now we're going back this direction. I think when you create permission for that, then that's what
I think it's a cultural thing within the home as well. I think that some of the things that I've seen work quite well are involving young people on the kind of the idea behind a rule. You've got a rule. This is the rule. Do you think it's a good rule? Yes or no? Okay, well, this rule is to keep you safe or to make sure your room's tidy or whatever. So how can we change the rule then? What's the creative problem solving around that rule? Just involving young people in the basic rules. It makes them kind of challenge the status quo a little bit as they grow up. They don't necessarily assume everything has to stay the same way. And so, I totally agree on that. I think there's something to be said with fostering disruptive behavior in a kind of positive way.
Yeah. Well, the mantra of Favela Inc. is include to transform. Okay. So it's about including the people who are participating or who are being served by whatever it is whatever program that you're creating in the process to truly transform both the process and the people. And that's exactly what you're talking
Amazing.
about. Yeah.
I love that. So I'm thinking, Adam, how old were you when you went into your first development? You were
I was 22.
so 22 years old.
Yeah.
Your parents were expecting you to finish uni and get the corporate job, and now you're walking into the favela for the first time. What screens?
Yeah. I don't know if my parents were ever actually expecting me to get the corporate job because I was already quite rebellious, and they had built that into me.
They had created the disruptive.
Yeah,
monster.
exactly. I was like, come on, guys.
Maybe they expected you to do that anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, so when I first went into the favela, I saw that it was actually completely different than what people had said, in the sense that I didn't feel unsafe. Of course, I saw things that could be indicative of an environment that's not safe, like police officers with bulletproof vests and giant machine guns, or even drug traffickers carrying weapons or with grenades on their hip. Wow. Selling cocaine in the streets. Like you see these things, and the initial visceral reaction is danger, but that's a judgment, because just because of what you've been told in the past, it's a conditioning. Like if I see these things, then there's danger for me. And what I learned on that day one in the favela and to this day is just because there's dangerous components does not mean it's dangerous for me. It means there is dangerous environments here, but there's dangerous environments everywhere. And everywhere you are, there's something that you're not seeing that if you did see, you might be in a state of fear. And it was this process that really taught me a lot about fear, because I noticed that the closer you are to something, the less fear that you have of it, because you understand it. So it's like when you're in the United States and you think about South America, you're like, oh, it's dangerous. I can't go there. And then you get to South America, or you come into Brazil, and then people are like, no, well, Brazil's okay, but don't go to Rio. Rio's dangerous. Yeah. And then you get to Rio, and they're like, don't go to the favela. And then you go to the favela, and they're like, don't go to that side of the favela.
So there's always something.
There's always something, and it's always about the dissonance. Like the more dissonance, the more fear.
Totally. I mean, fear really is just it's the imagination of something going wrong in the future, right? And
exactly.
That's very much linked to ignorance, not knowing. And like you said, the closer you are to something, the more you learn about it, the more fear drops.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons I say to people, you can always get used to something. If you're scared of public speaking, you do it enough times, you're used to it. You're scared of competing in martial arts, you get used to it. The fear dissolves the closer you are to something. That's really
training, consistency, execution over time is the remedy for fear, right?
Yeah.
And so I went through that process. It doesn't mean you don't feel the fear, right? It's like people who are master public speakers, it's not that they don't feel it. It's just they choose to not react based on that emotional experience. And so that's what it's like, okay, I see what's going on within me, and I'm going to choose to not, feed that. And that's what would happen every time I went into the favela. And until today, if I go into a new favela that I've never been into, those same feelings kind of come up. Like, okay, I don't know this place. There's a guy over there. He has a weapon. Is he a threat to me? So I recognize the feeling, but then I say, okay, what is the mindset that I want to have? The mindset I want to have is there is no threat to me. Everyone in and around me is doing something because they have a reason behind it, of which I don't understand yet. So let's understand. Let's ask questions and come from this place of recognize the ignorance. I recognize I'm ignorant in this environment. So let me just be completely open to the possibilities and ask questions in order to try to understand the reality better. So that's what I did that first day in the favela. And, very quickly, again, I'm playing soccer with the kids again.
Yep.
And I'm realizing, okay, this is the basis of the human connection. And from there, they're taking me to their parents' house. And it's like when a white foreigner shows up in a predominantly black, favela, it's like an extraterrestrial has just landed. So all the kids are coming out and like wanting to see, who are you? What are you doing there? But they're taking me to their families. They're taking me to the top of the favela. They're showing me the things that they're proud about in their community. And I felt completely and totally safe. And I said, there's something special going on here. There's an energy in these people that I still haven't understood where it comes from, but I want to find out. So I started going back to the favela every single day. And then I said, well, how can I add value here? And also learn at the same time. I didn't speak Portuguese, so I couldn't actually communicate with anybody through language. So I would communicate instead through information sharing or small acts of support. So helping a small entrepreneur there go through his budget. Like, we can do numbers together, right? We don't need to speak each other's language to go through numbers. And through that, I would help them figure out, like, if they're making money, if they weren't making money, why were they selling their product for 5 and the guy next door is selling for 4? And how do they react to that? So basic entrepreneurial concepts I noticed were revolutionary for them. And at the same time, I was learning from them without them even knowing it, about their culture, about who they are, why they are the way they are. So I spent that, and over the last 10 years, I've consistently just done this over and over again, is going to a community, sitting on a street corner with an old guy or somebody who lives there and just asking them questions. And through that is how I formed the basis of all the methodologies, anything that I've ever created.
Wow, incredible. It's amazing how, one concept and one approach then can just be the start of something incredible, right? And at what point did you start to formalize this into a social enterprise?
Yeah, so originally, like I said, I wanted to bring together tourism and connecting people. And I said, okay, so now I found an environment where I can utilize these areas and create value for other people and create value for myself. So it was clear to me what was possible there. And eventually I ended up taking over a company that was founded originally by a friend of mine named Elliot Rosenberg. And the name of the company is Favela Experience. So Favela Experience is a social impact tourism company. And it started off as a Indiegogo campaign to try to see if we could get foreigners from all over the world to stay in favela people's homes, in homestay experiences, teach them basic hospitality skills, help them organize their homes, and see if it can be a successful exchange that would both generate income for local families and a life-changing experience and a low-cost accommodation from people outside the favela.
Right.
And at this time, people were never staying in favelas. Like, there was tours that happened there, and a lot of those favela tours that happened that were what they call safari experiences. So people were coming up in vans and taking photos from their cars of people living in poverty. And obviously, that's not the type of tourism that we want to see happening, right, in the community. So through Favela Experience, we offered these accommodation homestay experiences, and it was a total success. We had people come from 25 different countries. We generated over $20,000 in a 3-month World Cup experience. Wow. Some of these families made more money in 1 month than they'd made the whole year before. And one of the women, I remember her name is the Passion Fruit Lady. And she was like a 65-year-old rapper who rapped about politics. And she also brought women that had been impregnated off the streets to live within her house. And at the same time, she wanted to be able to receive people in her home so she could help sustain all of this. So this is an example of a woman who had done everything to keep her home standing by herself. And in 1 month, we generated the same amount of income as she was able to make in 12 months. With that, she was able to send some of these kids that she was adopting to private school, to get private health care, radically improve the quality of her accommodation. So we saw in this moment the power that tourism could have when it was done in this type of a way.
Incredible.
Yeah. And so that's how I started working in favelas. And eventually I took over this company, and we expanded from 10 different homestay properties in the biggest favela in South America, which is called Rocinha. It's 300,000 people living in 1.5 square miles. And from that, we expanded into having social impact hostels and eventually creating a travel agency. And today, Favela Experience continues, but it's a B2B company focused primarily on building partnerships with corporations, travel agencies, universities, and creating customized, immersive experiences that generate impact.
Wow, incredible. All from that first trip, you kind of saw the opportunities there and brought it all together.
Exactly.
I love the idea that it's all that value is sitting there, and people have the opportunity to do it. It's just like giving them the mentoring or correcting small changes, and then bringing people together, developing those partnerships that actually makes it all come to life, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So that was the beginning of it all, was through Favela Experience, and over 7 years of time of running that company. We received over 6,000 tourists from 46 different countries. We worked in 10 different favela communities. I've now been to over 100 favela communities myself, just within the city of Rio. And we realized that although tourism can be very effective in breaking down negative stereotypes, connecting people, and bringing income into the communities, it was not a good mechanism for creating long-term sustainable change. And that became clear after the Rio Olympics and eventually after the pandemic, where everything that I had built went from being, this incredible ecosystem, 17 employees, to being just me all over again.
Wow.
And we're in debt. And how are we going to keep the company alive? Because the tourism industry just died, post Olympics. It was just evaporated. And so I realized that tourism in Brazil is a very vulnerable industry. It's constantly oscillating up and down. And if you want to bring long-term sustainable impact to the favela, which at the end of the day, that's what I really cared about, tourism was not the best mechanism for doing that. It's something that needs to be done and continue to cultivate over time, but we can't rely on it as the main source of transformative, impact or income opportunity in the favela itself. So that's when I created Favela Inc. And Favela Inc. is a nonprofit organization focused on resolving the systemic issues, the root causes of that have made favelas over many, many years continue to be places of low income, challenge, and urban poverty, and start to implement solutions that over the long term can create self-sustainability for the favela. Because for me, that's what it's all about, is how can we make sure that favelas don't have to depend on governments, don't have to depend on large nonprofit organizations, don't have to depend on anybody to guarantee a quality of life. They, through their own power of decision, ideas, and entrepreneurial capacity, can decide the future they want and cultivate that for themselves. And so that, I when I look at my organization today, it's like, I'm not building, this isn't me creating an organization for myself. It's me setting up the infrastructure and the governance and the processes and the systems so that 100 years from now, things can be a little bit different. And I know that the real transformative work, it's not even going to be me, the one that does it.
Amazing. I love that. I think the true legacy there is building something which you won't even get to see the kind of the true fruits of that labor, right? It's build that infrastructure. I think that's brilliant. And I really do think one of the biggest challenges, the systemic issues that you mentioned, is how dependable, people in these environments, these communities are. And I know that we've seen it through the Bates Foundation. The slums of Nairobi, or the poverty we've seen in the foothills of the Himalayas, or Kathmandu, or in Sri Lanka or India. It's often the environment means that they are dependable, whether they like it or not, right? It's really hard to break that, and that's probably one of the things you found, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the environment is constantly changing. There is no consistency or guarantee for tomorrow, right? The majority of people are living in an environment that demands an entrepreneurial spirit in order to survive. It's like you have minimum food or resources to sustain your family. Your job is not guaranteed, or maybe you have no job and you just sell informal products or services on the street every day. So every day is a process of working to achieve, survival and self-sustainability. And that requires you to be practice ingenuity, innovation, creativity on a daily basis with minimal resources.
Yeah.
And that creates a perfect environment for people to excel.
Yeah.
Because going back to what we talked to at the beginning.
Yeah, right. Isn't that amazing? It's I find that resilience in these communities is so strong, but it's like resilience is matched with that innovation and ingenuity. I remember I mentioned it before when I first came to a homeless shelter in Nairobi, and we were setting up our first Bates Foundation Warwick Academy Scholarship club there. And when I got there, they had already spent several months learning everything on YouTube from our free videos, and the students were all lined up in martial arts lines, and they did this excellent white belt martial arts class. They used a ping pong racket with a cushion in front for flying side kicks, and didn't have any kit at all, and it wasn't a converted pigsty. But the innovation was, one of them had an interconnection, the teacher, so he could then use that to teach everybody, and he had no martial arts background at all. But when I got there, they had just been using that resilience and using that innovation to bring that together. And I think in a lot of ways that's kind of what we're missing in the West. I look at a lot of the students that we teach, not just the Warwick Academy, but young people in general, and they've never had to have that much resilience, right? Now, obviously that's a privilege. You compare that to developing countries where they've had to have resilience. Right. And that's something we can help. A lot of charities do kind of help their, pull them out of that underprivileged situation. But the issue we've got is this lack of resilience. and lack of ingenuity because they've never had to be creative. And I often find that when you're desperate, you become quite creative. I know that when I was traveling as a young person with no money at all, I had to become very creative to come up with solutions, right? And I was, sleeping on trains and sleeper trains across India to save money on hotels, or I was, working at different hotels across Southeast Asia to bring tourists in so I could stay an extra week to get free accommodation and food.
Yep.
And you start to become A, resilient, and B, innovative and creative when you have to. And I think that's just part of the human spirit.
I call it Brazilians.
Brazilians, brilliant, amazing. One of the things I wanted to ask you before we kind of wrap up in a second is, obviously you've worked with thousands of people through the social enterprise you've created in the favelas. Is there any particular story that really stands out for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before getting into that, I just want to mention, one of the things that I've seen has really contributed to this environment is that you see, whether it's governments or nonprofit organizations or companies that interact with the favela in some way, there's always a short-term mindset, and it's always about a self-benefit. So it's like, what's in it for me? What's in it for my company? What's in it for my organization? What's in it for my donors? What's in it for the government is how do I make sure that I get reelected in 4-year cycles? So all of the actions that are being taken are always on a short-term level to create short-term results, to satisfy short-term mindsets so that you can keep things going.
Yeah.
And so the process that we've taken on is like, what if we just reverse all of that? What if we take a long-term process? What if instead of being about our individual interest, we make it about the interest of other people? And then when you do that, you end up satisfying your own interest, which is to achieve long-term success.
Yeah.
So an example of that in practice, there's this amazing young woman. Her name is Isis, or Isis in Portuguese, Maria. And she's the founder of Batucavide, which is a children's percussion school. And when I first met Isis, she showed up at my co-working space, where our hub of innovation that we operate out of. And she said, Adam, I have this dream to create a school of percussion for kids. But right now we have buckets that we're using on the streets, and we don't have any instruments. And I've also never done this before. And someone told me to come and see you if I wanted to, bring our dream into fruition. Well, about 6 months before that, through Favela Experience, we had facilitated an exchange experience with Batucavide, which is a children's percussion school from France in the favela. And as a legacy, they'd left behind a whole 3,000 euros worth of professional instruments that were just sitting in my storage, waiting for someone to show up who needed these instruments. And there was Isis saying, all I need is instruments.
Wow.
So I told her, you can't give up everything immediately, because otherwise, people think it's too easy. So I said, well, Isis, let's do this. Come back next week with a 1-page description of what is your project and and what do you want to achieve. I noticed that by giving people sometimes just that challenge, I filter out the people who are actually serious and the people who are just trying to maybe take advantage of a foreign-based organization in the favela that can maybe provide them with money, or maybe they want to do something because it sounds cool, but they're not willing to dedicate themselves to the execution of that over the long term, right? So she comes back a week later, and of course, poorly written, but she did it. And that's all I wanted to see, was like, she said she wanted something. I had a possibility to support her, but it required her to take some action. And would she take that action? And she did. And so then she showed up, and I took her to our storage, and I opened it up, and I said, you see all these instruments, 30 instruments? They're yours. Wow. And now you have a children's percussion school. So over the last 3 years, Isis, along with a variety of other social project leaders and entrepreneurs, have participated in our incubation program, which lasts 3 years. So different to most incubation programs, 3 months or 6 months. Ours is 3 years.
That goes along with your ethos of being there long term and having that long term view.
Exactly. Yeah, and Isis is a perfect example of Brazilians, right? Yeah. Because her mother was a drug trafficker who was in prison for over 5 years. Her grandmother is illiterate, or was illiterate. She passed away during the pandemic. And she was a young 23-year-old Black female growing up in the favela with, relatively no experience necessary in order to achieve her dreams. And against all of those odds, And until today, she is one of the brightest examples of what's possible. It's not about what we did for her. It's about what she did for herself. All we did is facilitate things by providing her with access to knowledge, access to resources, access to potential partnerships, and being somebody that along the way could just listen and say, what are your challenges? Okay, let's think about the solutions, but let's help you figure out how do you solve your own problems rather than coming to us and here's the solution. It's like, what is the critical thinking process that you need to go on in order to both identify your problems and identify your solutions? Because with that, then it's self-sustainability. There's no dependency on us. So what Isis has accomplished, she's accomplished for herself. And we're just in the background trying to support however we can. And today she has 70 students, professional instruments. They play shows every week, paid gigs every weekend. And last year they went to France and to the UN. They brought kids from the favela that had never even had a personal identity to go and play a percussion show at the UN where she gave a talk in English. Wow. So this is what's possible in a 3-year period of time.
Incredible.
When you take people that have the Brazilians.
Yeah, they've got the resilience, they've got the creativity, the ingenuity. They just needed the right contacts and the right support in the right place.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Yep.
Adam, super inspiring stuff. I know you and I have had a few chats today about how we can work together, how the Warrior Academy and the Bates Foundation can work with you and your organization. Super excited to see where that goes. It'd be amazing for us to support your charity work and your social enterprises, and potentially have a Warrior Academy club in some of your favelas. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, I think the academy would do great there. Martial arts is already a very strong element of Brazilian culture. Jiu-jitsu, and in any favela you go to, you see the basic elements of people who are using either boxing or jiu-jitsu as a tool for creating internal resilience to survive. And so I think the methodology that you guys have created here and the structure that it has executed in the favela environment, bringing discipline, but also allowing people to not be disciplined at the same time, I think could achieve some amazing results. And I hope we can work together. And I'm happy to help support that process whatever way I can.
Amazing. Warrior Academy meets resilience.
That's right.
That's what we need to do. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I really hope you enjoyed today's Warrior Academy podcast episode. We're going to keep creating these episodes because I know that so many parents find them useful or get insights or get ideas about how to develop their child's character. But it all comes down to the 3 C's: confidence, conduct, and concentration. So if you want to get a deep insight into the levels of confidence your child has, the level of concentration they have, or the level of conduct they have, so that you can actually put a score next to it and then work towards increasing those scores like we do in the Warrior Academy, then I'd love to invite you to fill in the Breakthrough Area Assessment. It takes about 5 minutes of your time, and you will get a personalized PDF report on your child's 3 C's. To access the Breakthrough Area Assessment and find out your child's 3 C's score, all you need to do is go to www.breakthrougharea.com.